And I think the reason that most hires fail, and I learned this back in the corporate world, is because we don't have a broad enough array of people to choose from. It's kind of like dating. The reason people get into bad marriages is because they didn't have enough options to begin with.
You're listening to Business Lunch with Roland Frasier. This is your seat at the table.
Hey everybody, this is Roland Frasier. Welcome to Business Lunch. Today we have a wonderful guest, Michael Hyatt. Michael, welcome.
Thanks, Roland. Glad to be on.
Glad to have you here today. Tell us, just so for anybody that's not familiar with you, can you give us the quick background on what your business is these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I spent most of my career in the book publishing field, so about 35 years. And then in 2011, I was the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers at the time. We sold the business to HarperCollins Publishers, and I decided to use that as my springboard to launch my entrepreneurial journey as a speaker and a writer. And so today I have a leadership development company, Michael Hyatt and Company. We have 40 employees. We're an 8-figure business. We do a lot of different things. We have live events, a live coaching program. We have physical products, a full focus planner, podcast, courses online, a lot of different stuff.
So the starting point for the entrepreneurial journey, was that was after Thomas Nelson?
Yeah, but the funny thing about it was the reason I was able to make that transition was because in 2004, I broke my ankle. Now you're thinking, how does that lead to an entrepreneurial journey? Well,
Right.
What happened was when I broke my ankle, I decided that I was going to use the time that I was laid up, and I had to have surgery on it, and I was out of commission for about a week. So I said, I think I'm going to start blogging. So in 2004, I started blogging, and my blog at michaelhyatt.com started to gain traffic and continued to grow. And by the time I left Thomas Nelson, I was having a couple 100,000 unique visitors a month visiting it, and I'd built up a mailing list, and I thought, this is going to give me a basis for launching my speaking career and book publishing and all the rest that it did. And then right after I left Thomas Nelson, in 2012, I published a book called Platform, Get Noticed in a Noisy World, which was everything I had learned up to that point about how to build an online platform. And that book hit the New York Times list, the USA Today bestseller list, and the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. And that really launched my speaking career. And we also turned that into a membership site, and that became sort of the financial backbone of the business.
Okay, that's really cool. So you literally did what you said, I'm guessing, in the build a platform thing, right?
I did exactly. I mean, basically it was kind of my diary of what I had done up until that point, and then I just kept learning and experimenting.
So, and is the building the platform, is that the main thing right now, or is it something
No,
different?
it's not the main thing. It's one of the businesses that we have, but I've really moved aggressively into the leadership and personal development space.
Okay.
So today my business is basically comprised of about 4 different components. So the biggest program I have is a high-end coaching program called Business Accelerator, and people can find out more at businessaccelerator.com. But we've got about 400 clients that meet with me face-to-face once a quarter, and we help them accelerate their business results, but more importantly, to do it in a sustainable way so that they get what we call the double win, which is to win at work and succeed at life. So
Right.
A lot of people teach what I call the hustle fallacy, which is basically put your health, put your family on hold, and just go, balls to the wall, try to make your business work, and everything else goes to pot. I don't believe that's not sustainable, and it's not what I teach. So Business Accelerator is for people that want sustainable success. Then we have a program that we take into corporations. It's also a live event that we host in Nashville 4 times a year called the Focused Leader Event. And that's all about goal achievement and greater productivity.
Okay.
Then we have a book club for leaders called Leader Books. And then we also have a physical analog planner that's gone gangbusters. This is about half my business now, called the Full Focus Planner, and people can find out more at fullfocusplanner.com. But that's an analog planner that enables you to focus on your most important priorities, execute against your goals, and really kind of gets you out of the distraction of a digital environment into a paper planner where you can make sure that your top priorities are getting done every day.
Okay, cool. And then there's a 4th one as well?
I think that was 4.
Okay, got the...
Business Accelerator,
Yeah.
the focus leader, leader books, and then the full focus planner.
And then the planner. Okay, the books and the planner I had together. Yep. Okay, cool. So now, which came first?
Well, I should say there was 5, but we treat it as a different business. So Platform University is what came first. So that was the membership site. And of course, I'm not including my podcast or my books in that mix. But then I used to have a program called Your Best Year Ever, and another program based on my newest book called Free to Focus. Those were both courses before they were books. And we retired these last December, which is an interesting thing as an entrepreneur. One of the things I've learned in my 8-year entrepreneurial journey, and in fact, I learned this in the corporate world also, is that you have to be willing to prune. So sometimes the best thing you can do to get new growth, to get healthy growth, or to maintain healthy growth is to prune the plant. And the same thing is true in your business. So both of those programs were highly profitable programs. We'd had literally 30,000 people go through my course, Your Best Year Ever, but we had a confusing customer journey. Okay. So in December, we had a consultant come in and he said to us I was meeting with my executive team, and he said, could you explain to me the customer journey? Where do people start? Where do they go next? How do they progress through, the suite of products that you offer? Right. And so we kind of all looked at each other and we said, we have no idea. It's basically you start somewhere and you end up somewhere else.
Right.
So we began in that meeting to map out the customer journey, and it required us pruning the path so that people could see clearly where they go on the path. And so now we have that. The business is much simpler. I think our customers are happier because they know where to progress, where they can start, and where they go in the next step. And it's simplified the business, and at the same time, it's made it more profitable.
So that's really cool. And I'd love to dive into that a little bit. So before the customer journey was, the entry points, I guess, were what? The 2 programs that you pruned?
You could start with one of the programs. Maybe you buy one of my books. Maybe you listen to the podcast. Maybe you hear about the coaching program. A lot of different entry points. And we didn't, I used to get asked by customer service all the time, hey, this guy just completed Your Best Year Ever course. What do I advise him to do next? He wants to go next. And I'd say, I don't know, or here are 3 things. He can pick one. Okay. But now it's clear. And
so what is the path now?
Okay. So the path now is that the entry point is typically free content. Okay. So it's either going to be my blog at michaelhyatt.com or my business podcast, Lead to Win, which I do with my daughter, Megan Hyatt Miller, who's also the CEO of our company. So it's all about leadership principles, stuff I've learned over, 40 plus years of my business career. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the entry point for most people. It could be a Facebook ad, it could be something like that too. Then the first entry point is typically one of my books. And then from one of my books, so that's like, $20 purchase or so.
Right.
Either put them into the planner, which is about $100 a year, or into leader books, which is $15 a month. So it's kind of the next price level up. Then the next step is the focused leader. So the 1-day live event is $997. And the online course, if they'd rather do that than the online event, is $597.
Okay.
From there, they go to Business Accelerator, which is my business coaching program.
Okay. And
so we have it all mapped out in a diagram too.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so what are the price points as they go up? So they've gone to the $15 a month, I think you said, leader books, and then what is next?
Yeah. So then the focus leader, it's going to be either the online course for $597 or $997 if they want to attend the live event in Nashville.
Okay.
Then my business coaching program is $15,000 a year.
Okay. And was there one on top of that as well?
Not yet, but we do have what we're affectionately calling Business Accelerator Elite, okay, which will be for entrepreneurs that are running businesses of at least $1 million. And that one's going to be $25K a year, but we'll introduce that next year.
Okay, great. And if you don't mind sharing, and if you don't want to do it, it's okay. What do you see as kind of conversions from one to the next?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I've got a whole marketing team that monitors that kind of stuff, but it's not where I really spend my time. My thing, where I spend most of my time, is creating content.
Okay, great. Do you have a process for doing that?
For creating content?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a great process for doing that.
All right.
So I've got an amazing content team. I've got a chief content officer who is a guy that worked with me at Thomas Nelson that came out of the world of book publishing. He's also a published author. And then I've got 5 other people on that team. So this is, I use something I call the 20 or the 10, 80, 10 principle, which means that on all content, I'm involved in the first 10% and the last 10%, but the content team takes that middle 80%, does the research, flushes it out with stories, just beefs it up. We do this with every piece of content. We produce a ton of content. So whether it's a podcast, whether it's, a blog post, whether it's a book, whether it's content for our one-day coaching intensives that we do with the Business Accelerator clients, that's how everything starts. It usually begins with a meeting. They pick my brain, or maybe I have some ideas that I've, jotted down an outline or whatever. We kind of flesh it out in the meeting. Then they go do their work, bring it back to me for approval. And it works great. The other thing we do, Roland, is we practice what I would call mega batching. I talk about this in my most recent book, Free to Focus. But like, for example, tomorrow, over the next day and a half, I'll record 9 podcasts in a row. Yeah. So that's typically what I do.
Right. That's, I find that to be the best as well. It's like you get it all in, and you're kind of in that mode, so you don't have to.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. That's really cool. So now, even with the book, you do the 10-80-10 thing, huh?
Yeah, I didn't used to. Like, I've written 10 books so far, actually 12, but there's 2 yet to come out. Okay. But of the 10 books, I wrote the first 8, every word myself. By my own count, I recently did a webinar on this, where I totaled it up. I've written 2 million words. So I've written a lot of stuff myself, but now it's a whole lot more effective for me to come up with the concept. That's where I add the most value, and the frameworks. So in a book like Free to Focus, I came up with all the different frameworks that we teach. There's something called the Freedom Compass. There's the Ideal Week. There's all these things inside of the book. I come up with that. They'll pick my brain for the stories, but it is enormously helpful to have somebody else that's actually pulling the research, finding the stories, putting together the first draft. Then I can go through and do my magic. Now, this is kind of interesting. So like, a lot of people say, well, I could never do that because no one can write like me. Right. Here's the thing I learned is that like my chief content officer, Joel, basically deconstructed my voice. And by my voice, I mean my writing voice. Right. So he said, okay, here's the thing. Here are the attributes. And we literally have a written document that we use to train new writers. And he said, here's the thing we know about Michael's voice. He likes short, punchy sentences. He always speaks in the active voice. Mm-hmm. He uses simple vocabulary. He loves lists. He likes subheads, so things are scannable. He always starts everything with a story. He ends with a story. He tries to engage people in their heart before he tries to, engage their head. So this is all, codified in a document. Right. And we train writers on this so that usually, within a couple of months, a new writer can get my voice, whether it's a webinar or whatever. And it's amazing. Sometimes I can read stuff by our best writers and I go, I must have written that. I mean, it sounds just like me. Or even better, I'll say, that sounds better than me. I like it.
Awesome. That's really cool. That's cool. And how long have you been doing that?
3 years now.
That's really great. So when you're thinking about building a team like this, how do you go about picking the right people?
Oh, this is key. Well, first of all, I think as an entrepreneur, you eventually come to the place where you realize you need a team. And in fact, I would say if your dream doesn't require a team, your dream is too small.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay. So once you decide that you're willing to have a team, you've got a choice. You can do what Jim Collins talks about in Good to Great, which he says there's 2 kinds of leaders. There's the leader that's the genius with 1,000 helpers.
Right.
Or you can decide to deploy people so that they're bringing to the table the best and highest use of them, so that it frees you up to do the best and highest use of you. And so that's the model I've tried to follow.
Okay.
So in our hiring process, whenever we identify a new teammate, we're asking ourselves the question, first of all, we want a large sampling. I think the reason that most hires fail, and I learned this back in the corporate world, is because we don't have a broad enough array of people to choose from. It's kind of like dating. The reason people get into bad marriages is because they didn't have enough options to begin with. And so in hiring, entrepreneurs will hire the first person that can fog a mirror, the first person that they like, and those aren't great criteria for hiring. So we said, let's approach this like we do marketing. So let's create a sales page that's designed to convince prospective employees that we would be an awesome company to work with. So they already come with sort of the pre-framing, predisposed to buy into our company. So we don't have to do the selling. We can do the evaluating, but we put them in the mode of excited about working for us. So people can see our page at michaelhyatt.com/careers. That's our sales page, and that's how we think of it. It sells prospective employees on us. Whenever we have an open position, we start with a job description. If you don't have clarity about what you're looking for, it's going to be hard to recognize the right person when they show up. So we get crystal clear among our team as to exactly what qualifications, what kind of experience, and something we have called the Freedom Compass. What are the tasks that are in their desire zone, the things where they have passion and proficiency? Do those map to the job description? So it starts with the job description. Then we go out and promote it using our email list, using social media, because we figure that the people that are already in our tribe are already people that get us in terms of our philosophy, our key frameworks, our core values, all that stuff. We'd rather not have to convert somebody or convince somebody that stuff. We'd like to have that sort of pre-baked in when they show up.
Right.
So then they enter into the process, the interview process. We use an automated system, which I can't remember the name of right now, but basically it requires people to do a short video where they answer some questions so that we don't have to schedule, like typically, and I know this for a fact, our typical, we'll typically have 81 applicants for any position that we open up. And so sometimes more, sometimes less, but we can't interview that many people. So we try to automate as much of that as we can. Then in the final interview process, then we're going to have real, human to human interview process. And it's multiple interviews. We use a tool. I don't know if you're familiar with the Colby test. So that's been the single biggest predictor of success for us with new hires. And we use Colby's Right Fit program.
Okay.
Where they test the hiring manager and they test the person that's the prospective employee, and they make sure that there's a right fit. And when we've gone against that, we've typically failed. And when we follow it, we typically succeed. Again, it's the biggest predictor of success for us. People can find out more at Colby.com, KOLBE.com. But we've had 3 of our teammates certified in that system, and we really believe in it.
That's really great. Now you mentioned, and I think Colby is fantastic. And thank you you're doing our work for us and providing all the links. I like that.
Okay. Okay.
The frameworks you mentioned, and I think frameworks are so important. How did you start thinking about that? And for somebody that's listening, that's thinking that they want to create something along the lines of what you've created, information, business, and training wise, what would you tell them as far as about frameworks and how they might think about getting something like that created themselves?
Well, I would say that frameworks are simply a way where you take a blizzard of information that would otherwise be confusing and overwhelming, and you simplify it and make it easy to digest.
Right.
Okay. So let me give you an example. So in Free to Focus, my most recent book, I said, basically when it comes to looking at all the tasks you have to do, the key to productivity is not getting more done. It's getting the right things done. But how do we filter all this stuff that comes at us and get the right things done? So I came up with a framework that I call the Freedom Compass. And I'm just trying to illustrate how you would do this.
Yeah, it's perfect.
So I took if you think of a traditional 2x2 matrix where you have 4 quadrants.
Yep.
Okay, you got to imagine this. And if you rotate that 45 degrees and make it a circle, you have a compass. It has a north, south, east, and west, but 4 quadrants. So at the intersection, and you divide it into 4 things with 2 axes, so you have proficiency and passion. So you have tasks that you're passionate about, you love to do. They get you up in the morning, they satisfy you, you're excited about them. But then there's also tasks where you're proficient, that you're really good at these things. You're highly skilled, they drive results in your business. Where your passion and your proficiency meet, I call that true north, and I call it the desire zone. The exact opposite of that is where you have no passion. You don't like doing it. You may hate doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have no proficiency. You don't have any skill at doing it. You're just not any good, and it doesn't drive results.
Right.
So I call that the drudgery zone. So in my drudgery zone are going to be activities like processing email, managing my calendar, processing expense reports, booking my own travel. I hate those things.
Mm-hmm.
The cool thing is that my assistant, Jim, is great at those. Those things that are in my drudgery zone are in his desire zone. And so we're perfectly matched. We complement one another. And then there's two other zones. There's the disinterest zone and there's the distraction zone. And people can read more about that in the book. But that would be a framework. That's a simple way, a filter that people can use for deciding where they ought to be spending the majority of their time. Because I say the people that are getting the biggest business results are the people that are spending most of their time working in their desire zone, not their drudgery zone, not their disinterest zone, not their distraction zone, but their desire zone. So say no to the things that are not true north, say no to the things that are not true north, and yes to the things that are in your desire zone. Does that make sense?
So, yeah, totally. And I appreciate that example. So for you, do you create a whole bunch of content and then from that deduce the framework, or do you start by saying, I got to create this overarching thing and then create the content around that, or something else?
Yeah, it can happen a lot of different ways. Sometimes it may come from me, I'm out for a run and I'm listening to somebody's podcast and I have this insight. By the way, this is one of the reasons I read as much as I read. I don't read for retention, in order to regurgitate what I've heard. Mm-hmm. I read for stimulation. And so sometimes somebody else's idea will spark something, and sometimes sort of the framework will arise out of it organically. Like one of the things I was thinking of the other day, I was listening to somebody's coaching program. I think it might have been Dan Sullivan. And I thought, one of the things I think my readers would like is what are the criteria that you would use in hiring a business coach? What do I wish somebody had taught me, 20 years ago when I hired my first business coach? What's the criteria? So then I turn off the podcast and I start thinking, and so I end up with three sort of criteria for it. So sometimes it happens that way. Sometimes I just do a brain dump. What do people know on productivity? And I just get it out there, totally unstructured, unfiltered, just a whole bunch of ideas. And then I start to ask myself, how could I organize this? Is there sort of a natural way to organize these? Is it a logical way? Is it component? What are there's a lot of different models you could use, but sometimes you sort of impose the structure on chaos.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just kind of arises and you start with the structure and then, like a Christmas tree, start hanging ornaments on it.
Right. So that's really cool. And then then your team kind of fleshes out the rest of it if you've got that part done.
Totally. Yeah, and a lot of times what they'll bring to the table is the research. So for example, in my book, Free to Focus, one of the things I sort of started with this overarching model. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, I think the thing that people need to do before they do anything related to productivity is stop, which is the exact opposite of what you think you need to do when you want to be productive, because you think you need to go. And I say, no, you got to stop. And so, you got to stop. You got to evaluate, wait a second, what's my productivity vision? I got to evaluate where I'm at. And I need to spend some time rejuvenating. So in other words, one of the most important things you can do to be more productive and to be more focused is get a good night's sleep, get the proper nutrition, exercise. So I knew that was all true because I'd experienced it in my own life, but I said to my team, this is my hypothesis, go out and find the research. How does sleep impact productivity? So they rolled up their sleeves, they went out, they did the research, they pulled in amazing research on that very topic, and that's all baked into chapter 3. And I could give you a gazillion examples in that one book, but that's typically how we work. That's awesome.
What are you most excited about now?
That's a good question. I think coaching, it's kind of interesting because, some people will experience a level of transformation in reading a book, but a lot of people read it and don't experience any transformation. Mm-hmm. I mean, just be honest. A lot of people buy courses and they intend to go through the courses, but and this is kind of the dirty little secret of the course business, is that not that many people finish courses, especially online courses. Hate to say it, people start with good intentions, but they don't.
Yeah.
The thing I love about face-to-face coaching is people are way more invested. First of all, when people pay, they pay attention. And I find that my coaching clients are the most invested because they've invested the most financially. Mm-hmm. They travel to Nashville once a quarter to meet with me face-to-face in cohorts of 50, and we meet all day long. And those people get amazing transformations. Our business accelerator clients, on average, in the first 12 months, and we track this like a hawk, but in the first 12 months, they'll experience, on average, 67% growth in revenue. And at the same time, will reduce their workload by 11 hours a week. So to me, that's the achieve more by doing less promise. So witnessing that kind of transformation and hearing the stories from those clients, that's what gets me excited. If I could do that all day, every day, that's what I would do.
That's great. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So the cohorts of 50, how did you come up with that as the optimal number?
I would love to tell you that it was science.
An algorithm.
An algorithm, but it just seemed like the right number. You know, we experimented for a while. We tried, I think the first group we tried was about 12. I ran that group for 3 years. Wasn't enough, you know, and that was more like a mastermind. Yeah. And I wanted something that was more of, you know, where I was downloading content and then they had the opportunity in a peer context to discuss that content and to interact with each other and then to ask me questions and so forth. So we expanded, I think, a group up to 40, and then we tried 50, we tried 60, and just 50 seemed like the right amount. And so now we've got 8 groups of 50.
Okay, and then they come in for how long? For 2 days?
For 1 day. So once a quarter, they come in. They usually come in the night before. They spend all day with me, so from about 9 to 5. And that's it. You know, entrepreneurs are busy. And we say to them, this is an opportunity for you to get out of the context of your business so you can work on your business, not in your business.
Okay. And how does this differ from, say, a mastermind? Because it's a coaching program, not a mastermind.
That's a great question. So a mastermind typically is totally peer support. And I love that. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes if you're not careful, and this is not taking away anything from masterminds, if you're not careful, it could be the blind leading the blind.
Sure.
And so the problem with the one-on-one coaching is that I find, and I've done some of that too in the past, the thing I find there is that sometimes it will create a dependence upon the coach, mm-hmm. and it doesn't give you the opportunity to learn from your peers. And so to me, the kind of context that the format that we use is the best of both possible worlds. In fact, I say to our clients, we won't consider one-on-one coaching unless you're in our group coaching, because the group coaching sort of covers all the basics and gives you the tools to build your business. The one-on-one coaching is much more specific and customized to kind of a tactical problem that you may have, you know, that you're facing in your business right now. But the group coaching is the foundation.
Okay. And have you ever tried remote coaching, like doing those groups remotely or anything like that?
Well, first of all, there is a remote component in our group coaching. So we have a weekly huddle meeting that's mostly about inspiration and about accountability. Then we have a monthly webinar program that's all remote for each cohort, and that's taught by one of my associate coaches. So there is a remote component. And then we also use a software platform called Mighty Networks, so people can access one another on a daily basis if they want to, and we post in there and that type of thing. So so we use remote where it makes sense, but I still find that people want to get together face to face and press the flesh and, you know, experience people, you know, like they only can when they're face to face.
Okay. And so now you mentioned you're at 8-figure business now, and you've got these 8 groups. How do you scale more without, like, is there a point at which you can have this be a business that could sell, that you can take yourself out of it, or grow significantly larger, or do you not want to do any of those things?
No, I definitely want to do that. You know, my vision is for us to be a $100 million company over the course of the next 5 years.
Okay.
And so we think our goal is to get 3,000 people in that program, but I can't teach 3,000 people, right?
Right.
So we're in the process right now of recruiting coaches. We have 2 additional coaches right now. And so we're trying to, and this is going to kind of sound funny, but I'll explain what I mean by this. We want to depersonalize our company. Yeah. And by depersonalize it, we don't want me to be the personality. We want people to be attracted to the program. So the process or the program has to be sort of the celebrity, not me as the personality.
Yeah.
So when you're building a business, if you have a face on the business, a personality, it's faster and you can create trust. And I think it's great for starting, but it can also be a ceiling on your business, because if you're not careful, the business can't grow beyond your ability to handle it.
Right.
So so that's what we're doing. And we got a lot of different strategies for that, but it's a major focus. And I've said to my team, I said, by 2022, I'm not going to be the CEO. I will still be the owner. I will be the chairman of the board. There'll be certain defined things that I do. I want to continue to speak on behalf of the company and write, but I'm not going to be operationally responsible for anything.
Right.
So we'll have a CEO. I've already named the CEO. And so that person is now our COO. It happens to be my daughter. She'll be running everything. So there's a clear plan of succession.
Nice. And when you do that, what will you do with all of the time once your daughter is taking over all those duties?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have zero intention of retiring.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got a couple of other businesses I want to start, but on behalf of the company, I want to speak 10 to 12 times a year. I want to write one major book a year, and that's pretty much it. I'll meet with the executive team once a quarter for a board meeting. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I've got other entrepreneurial things I want to pursue.
What are the other things you want to start?
Well, it's kind of too early to talk about it, but
okay, fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. That's cool. Okay, great. Well, thank you for spending the time here today. What, if people want to get a hold of you, you mentioned some of the things, but to summarize for them, what are all the places people should go to find out more?
I think the best thing would be to start with the podcast. Again, it's called Lead to Win, or just search for my name on iTunes. I'm sure you'll link to it. Okay. But also my website, michaelhyatt.com, has links to everything else I do.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate you spending the time here today.
Thanks, Roland. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you.